Matt Marble, welcome to the Witch Wave.
Thank you, Pam. So wonderful to be here.
Are you kidding me? I have been looking forward to this so much. I can't even tell you. Not to put pressure on you, but
Hmm.
I'm just such a fan of yours and of what you do and have been an admirer from afar for a long time. So I'm very excited to get to see you and meet you. Thank you for doing this.
Same. The feeling is mutual.
Yay! So I want to start with just like the basic question, which is you do so many different projects under the umbrella of the American Museum of Paramusicology. When you are asked to describe what that is, because I know there's many spokes on that wheel, how do you describe it?
Well, I like to think of it as honing in on the numinous experience that we can all kind of relate to in our lives, and I think artists and musicians relate to that especially strongly. And uh, ultimately, for me, it means getting out of your way as an artist,
Mhm.
and in terms of the thoughts that are going on in your head, as well as the noise in your life and the phenomenal limitations that we encounter. So by paramusicology, it's really trying to open us up in that way, and that's a kind of a liberating movement. So there, and due to the traditions, um, having this direct relationship to socio-political aspects of life, it's there's personal liberation and there's social liberation, and those
Mm.
two I think are especially important to kind of conceive together these days as well.
Yes. Oh, so beautifully said. And so the term paramusicology, am I correct in assuming you mean like metaphysicality? Like how
Hmm.
do you describe that word? Could you tease it out a little bit?
Yeah. Melvin Willen was the first to kind of coin that word in the 1990s. And he used it to refer to kind of pagan histories of music as well as investigations into paranormal experiences of music. And so I'm not so interested in investigating like the legitimacy of claims and so forth. But what I've kind of done is really expand the umbrella of that term to encounter as many avenues to that as possible. And I focus on the really artistic biography. So I'm interested in how these traditions really impact people's lives, and I'd say that's more what I'm sharing than anything is kind of these windows into people's lives, and it often veers into extra musical territory as well
Mhm.
as the metaphysical traditions do, but also these people tend to have very interesting lives and kind of influencing culture in lots of different ways.
Yes. So under that umbrella of the museum, and am I correct that this is not yet a physical space? This is more of like a museum that transcends space and time?
Yes, there's a physical component to it, which I've kind of over the years been developing this kind of archive fever and collecting all kinds of rare recordings, rare books, rare photographs, letters, in some cases extant archives of certain artists, and that's been a big part of it. And a lot of the stuff I offer kind of comes in through the archive.
Mhm. And this archive, does it live in your home? Is this a place that one might be able to visit?
It is in my home. You're welcome to come by. I don't get many visitors in Greensboro, North Carolina, but feel free to stop by. Uh,
Careful, I'm gonna take you up on that because I really wanna see what you have in that collection. It sounds
oh, please
so
do.
fascinating. And do you hope one day that this will be housed in a public museum or some kind of archive or public collection?
That would be dreamy. Foregoing that, I would love to see an exhibition of some kind at some point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ah, yes, absolutely. Okay, I'm holding this intention with you. I see it in my mind's eye.
Thank you.
So, one of the areas that you work in is also podcasting. You make this beautiful, exquisite show called the Secret Sound Podcast. And for those listening or watching, it's a subscriber based model. I think it's $5 a month.
Hmm.
It is so the value you give us for $5 a month, I mean, it's absurd. I mean, everybody needs to go and subscribe because that gives us access to 2 different podcasts you've done, correct? Let alone a journal that you write monthly and so on. Tell us a little bit more about this monthly membership and all your different offerings.
Yeah, so the Secret Sound well, thank you for saying that as well. The Secret Sound podcast is behind there, and there's 43 episodes now. Um, and I'm actually I kind of took a pause from it for a while, but I'm actually starting new episodes right now. One on
Oh,
this,
thank
yeah,
God.
one on this fascinating Pythagorean multimedia artist, Barbara Hero, who's just fascinating. Um, but yes, with the $5 subscription, you get the access to the 43 episodes, some of which are available on the website for everyone. And then the monthly journal generally has some sort of historical essay that I'm working on, as well as an interview with contemporary musicians and artists. The next issue, for example, is going to feature C. Lavender, or Lavender
Ooh.
Suarez, who's an amazing sound healer and composer.
Oh,
Um,
fabulous.
yeah, really wonderful.
So let's talk about the Secret Sound podcast. I'm obsessed with it, but I'm also doing this weird thing where I'm not binging it because every episode is so, and I mean this as like the highest praise, it's dense, it's beautifully produced. I mean, my goodness, the amount of production that you put into each of these episodes, it's not only you narrating and telling us about a metaphysical musician, but you're then playing us archival sound. You're obviously playing us samples of music when it's available. These are gorgeous, gorgeous episodes. So I confess I haven't listened to all of them yet because I'm kind of like doling them out slowly, like delicious candy. But for our listeners who might not be familiar with the podcast yet, can you talk about some of the artists that you cover?
Yeah, I generally I kind of root all this work in the ancestors. So there's not a lot of living people that enter the Secret Sound podcast, though I did one on David Lynch before he passed, and I highly recommend. That's a good place to start, actually.
Mhm.
Um, and I did one on Louise Landis Levy, who's an incredible poet, musician, translator, and she's still with us. But most of the podcasts are on historical figures and some familiar, but I generally favor people who have been either kind of historically marginalized and forgotten, or were not really known to begin with. Um, someone like Vincent Lopez, who was this kind of metaphysical band leader, the biggest band leader of his era, now completely forgotten, but was also a metaphysician and publishing books on all of these topics, and would do numerological readings on his stage shows and that kind of thing.
Incredible.
Um,
What time period roughly was he in?
this is like the 40s, 50s.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. And some of the other names that were unfamiliar to me are, I mean, we'll just start with the first 2 episodes. There's Francis Grierson and Catherine Ruth Heyman. Can you talk a little about those 2 and why you decided to start with them?
Yeah, Francis Grierson was the worst, the first kind of rabbit hole I went down after um, writing Buddhist Bubblegum on Arthur Russell's use of Buddhism. I started looking backwards in time and looking for a lineage of artists that had nothing to do with style and everything to do with spirit and kind of magical approaches to music. And Francis was one of the first people that I kind of was looking into. He's pretty well known now as a psychic pianist.
He is not pretty well known, my
Well, no,
friend. For
within the
dorks like
circles.
us. Yes, yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Keep going, keep
Yeah.
going.
Um, but in the newspapers at the time, he was described as the strangest man in the world and all kinds of epithets like that. Um, but he, was so popular in his day that he was gifted by these wealthy architects a Victorian mansion custom designed for him to do
Ugh.
musical seances.
The
And
dream.
and there are stories that he was like kind of tucking away people behind hidden walls to create sonic illusions,
Mm.
and he seemed to kind of navigate this in between space of sincere dedication to these kind of metaphysical interests, and also kind of putting on a show.
Mhm.
And that's something that is specifically interesting with Francis, is this kind of, he would oscillate back and forth, and um, his music was really kind of rooted in channeling either the spirits of deceased composers or kind of programmatic scenes from past lives and that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
this was a really imaginative, improvisatory practice that he was, he was playing before kings and queens and dressed strangely and was just a force.
Ah, incredible. And was he I'm trying to remember because it's been a little while since I listened to that episode. Was he primarily a pianist or was he a composer? Both?
Primarily a pianist, and
Mhm.
his name early on was um, I'm going to blank on it, Jesse Shepard, and he basically changed his name to Francis Grierson after kind of getting some flack for his mediumship. But then he transitioned into authorhood and published just a series of books, largely on metaphysics, on his travels and celebrity encounters, um, and also one of the more kind of historically interesting takes on 19th century or turn of the century America. Um, but yeah, he was just a fascinating figure. Unfortunately, we don't have any recordings of him, but
Yes, yes, I know. That must be something that you come up against from time to time, especially with these, you know, I mean, the more ancestral kind
absolutely,
of
yeah.
musicians. So, what made you choose Catherine Ruth Heyman as your second episode on the Secret Sound podcast?
Yeah, so my background is really in experimental music, free improv, avant-garde composition, so forth. And Catherine Ruth Heyman was this name I kept kind of coming across with a lot of the figures in that history, right? With Dane Rudyard, the astrologer, painter, composer,
Yes.
Henry Cowell, who was at a theosophical commune as a teenager and went on to do very innovative work and influenced numerous composers like John Cage. Um, and there's just this whole line of figures, Ruth Crawford Seeger as well, who were kind of gravitating around this woman in New York and in Chicago. And she would hold salons where she would kind of perform avant-garde music. She was a huge influencer as far as getting Scriabin's music out there, right? The
I
Russian
love
composer,
Scriabin. Yeah, I
very
write about
beautiful.
him a little bit in my new book. So,
Oh, awesome.
but I imagine a lot of people don't know who he is either. But anyway, go. I'm getting too excited. Keep going.
Yeah. Uh, in a nutshell, Russian composer who applied the teachings of the Theosophical Society, creating tone color fusions and color organs and so forth. So she was not only playing his piano music and getting it out there, touring it all over the world, she was also advocating these teachings, these metaphysical teachings, with Theosophy and with Gurdjieff's teachings as well, George Gurdjieff.
Mm. Mhm.
And so she was introducing a lot of these young composers to these teachings and kind of contrasting to a lot of the spiritualist and new thought traditions that were influencing a lot of Americans at the time. Theosophy seemed to turn on this kind of fixation on dissonance for the first time, where it was becoming this. It was ultimately a way of conceiving cosmic sound, right? They were using their imagination to conceive cosmic sound and these kind of metaphysical ideas of sound and listening. And Henry Cowell is a great example because he developed the cluster technique, which was where he kind of flattened out the keys on the piano with a board or with his fists and would just play all the notes at once. And this was to evoke, right, an Irish deity from Irish mythology.
Oh,
So
yes.
we
Put
have
it in
these.
my veins, I'm telling you. Like, I live for all of this. And what and when you say cosmic sound, is that the
Mhm.
phrase you used? Am I correct in assuming that means, like, that there's this idea that sound is immanent in everything and including, like, on the spiritual realm, so they're trying to get to some kind of, like, universal
Yeah,
energy field or what exactly?
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And the cosmos being also immanent within us.
Right.
So that points to kind of another aspect of a lot of my research, which has to do with these kind of vibratory theologies that we can find in ancient Indian tradition, with like Nada Brahman, with
Mhm.
the African Bambara people who referred to a similar thing as yo, or Christian mystics referring to the logos, right? So this throughout global metaphysics, we have this fundamental role of sound, which is essentially the bridge between mind and matter. And that's also kind of where the magical agency and discipline come into it. And just recently, I read a book called Musicology of Religion. This just came out. It's pretty much an emergent field by
Mm.
this, really pioneered by this guy named Guy Beck. Very beautiful scholarship. And one thing I took away from the end of this book, he has like this little trinity that of an idea, this kind of like universal key to why music and religion are so intricately intertwined throughout human history. And he points to ritual, sound and music, and word or idea, thought, right? And
Yes,
this is
yes,
the ingredients for magic, right? So
absolutely.
to see a scholar kind of articulate that in such a simple way was it just points to the inherent aspect of that.
Oh, yeah. And, I probably mention this too often. And again, I write about this. Just the idea that the root word of the word enchant is the Latin incantare, which means
Hmm.
to sing. And the idea of like song as a spell, these are such enchanting ideas. And I think it's something that we know, like, we have, like, a deep knowingness, especially when we're children and our parents are singing to us lullabies to soothe us. Like, there's something about music that is medicinal, therapeutic, it's an elixir, it
Yeah,
can change our vibrations, it can possibly make things happen. Um, I don't know, I just find it such a wonderful thought and something I think we intuit, but it's great that there's actual scholarship happening around these ideas now too.
yeah, I was excited to see that.
Oh, how wonderful. So, with the Secret Sound podcast, you also do talk about names that I think people will be a little bit more familiar with. I mean, your Alice Coltrane episode, mwah, it is
Thank you.
so wonderful, and I'm so happy that she seems to finally be getting her due. I know there's
Hmm.
gonna be a huge retrospective of her at I believe it's the Hammer Museum
Hmm.
in LA soon. Um, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about her because I know folks probably know that she was John Coltrane's wife and that she was a genius in her own right, but what else do you think people should know about Alice?
Well, she dedicated her life to the teachings, studying Sai Baba, studying Vedanta. Um, and when you read her writings, uh, her kind of scripture, essentially, she published her own kind of gospel. Just the things that she went through from intentional starvation to burning herself with fire. I mean, it was very intense. The practices that she went through to really,
Ordeals.
yeah, absolutely. So to purify herself in this way, and uh, just this is one thing I take a lot of inspiration from, and a lot of the figures that I look at is the dedication and the devotion to the practice, where it
Mm.
becomes this kind of um, the world that they live in, and those tend to be the people that inspire others. And just the way that has continued to inspire others is something that speaks a lot to what she offered us and continues to offer us. Um, but there is a book that's coming out pretty soon, Monument Eternal, if not out already. So I'm hoping that her writings can also get out there a little bit more. Um, they're just really inspiring.
Oh, yeah, talk about, like, pure, pure genius. Excuse me, and her music is so gorgeous. I mean, for anybody who hasn't heard it well, actually, what's a good sort of intro album that you would recommend for someone to get a taste of what Alice was, cooking in her cauldron?
Mhm. My favorite and the one that I was first exposed to was Turia Sings, and this is incredible singing with just this kind of epic wash of synthesizers and talk about cosmic sound. she really captures something on that record, and every song is just so powerful and so, it's like so softly strong. There's like such a strength in her softness that I hear in that particular album.
Oh,
Um, it's just beautiful.
gorgeous. And when I think of her, I tend to think of harp. I mean, I think
Hmm.
of just all those like trilling. I don't know. The language is failing me right now, as it often does with music. But it just feels, yeah, it really feels like you're being leveled up somehow when you listen to her music.
Absolutely.
It's like communicating on this effervescent cellular level or something. She's just so unreal. What an incredible goddess of a composer and a player. Um, I wish we could talk about, like, every episode, but everybody needs to go and listen to The Secret Sound. I'll just give a quick shout out to Exuma, who's one of my favorite musicians, born as Tony McKay, and I was so thrilled that you not only have an episode about him, but I watched your recent online lecture that you gave for the Philosophical Research Society. This lecture is called American Muse: A Brief History of American Metaphysical Music. It was so wonderful.
Thank you.
And the fact that you shouted him out there too made me so happy. So, can you give just like the quickest little taste of Exuma for people before we expand into some of your other spokes on your cosmic wheel?
Yeah, Exuma, aka the Obeah Man,
Yes.
came from the Bahamas and to New York City uh, at a time when the East Village was just flowering with people like Bob Dylan, John Lee Hooker, Nina Simone, and he was playing shows with all these people. But he was, unlike them, he was drawing heavily from his Bahamian heritage and from the Obeah magic that was indigenous to that area. Um, though at a time when colonial influence had really oppressed that in the
Mm,
Bahamas, and that it was being rejected by the indigenous population. So he found kind of more reception for his Obeah heritage on the stages in the East Village than he did in his hometown. But he, I mean, he was invoking deities on stage. He was really kind of putting on a performance, a ritual on stage. And you can kind of hear that in the music. He uses lots of extra musical sounds to evoke these things as well.
so you were saying he's just a force.
Absolutely. And I just love the idea of it mixing with this kind of Americana that was forming in the East Village around that time. But really just powerful music, um, and invoking the orishas. The Dambala is the track that I come back to a lot, and Nina Simone has done a beautiful cover of that as well.
Yes.
Um, yeah, really special, man.
It's such exquisite music. I highly recommend people listen to as much as they can get their ears on. So, one of the people that you both have an episode about, but someone who I actually think of you as perhaps an incarnation of is Harry Smith.
Oh wow, thank you.
Um, and, Harry Smith is someone who, again, he is just now, I think, getting some of the appreciation and love that he really deserved when he was still on this side of the veil. And I just think of him in terms of, obviously an archivist of music, certainly a visual artist, which you are as well, an anthropologist. He clearly was so interested in esotericism and magic. And there was a really lovely little retrospective of his work, his films, but some of his visual art and some of the music that he collected at the Whitney. I believe it was in 2023. Yeah, yes, that is correct. 2023. Um, and I'm wondering if you see him as a kindred spirit or a guiding spirit for the kind of work you're doing as an archivist and as a creator yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. No, he's been a huge influence on me, and I kind of come back to this one. I forget even where I read it. Probably in one of the books that are out there on him, but there's this scene where a friend is describing walking down the street with Harry, and he just crosses a trash can and suddenly just dives in and starts kind of taking all the contents out and arranging it on the sidewalk. to the point where people start gathering around him, looking at what he's trying to figure out what he's doing. And it was just this kind of magical moment where he's kind of collaging discarded materials into something meaningful. And that there's something so powerful in that idea that just putting things together that were not previously together before is a magical procedure, and is very powerful in and of itself. And so a lot of like the archival work I've done is really about making sure these objects are in one place together.
Yes.
And that's something I take directly from Harry, because any one of these artists and any one of these metaphysical traditions is supremely inspiring on their own. But there's something else. There's like this third magic that happens when they come together in this way, and so that's really a big part of what I do, and I draw a lot of that from Harry.
Absolutely. You're both alchemists in that regard for sure. Now, I understand you're a musician yourself, you're a visual artist, and from what I've seen on your website, you're very talented at both of those things.
Thank you.
How has your own practice maybe shifted or changed based on the research and the archiving that you've been doing? Or did that begin and I guess I'm asking, like, is it the chicken or the egg? Like, which came first, your research and then your creating, or do they kind of feed each other at the same time?
I think I did. They were an ignorant relationship for a long time, and there were kind of two turning points. One, working on the dissertation on Arthur Russell,
Mhm.
where I got kind of exposed to Vajrayana Buddhism and Tantric Buddhism for the first time in any kind of in-depth way. And that opened up a love for metaphysical philosophy in general, which I had previously kind of held at arm's length, distrusting the sensationalism of everything.
Mm.
Though I was always drawn to mystical philosophy. But then I had a kind of a life falling apart experience, and then a dream woke me up at the beginning of the pandemic, and that caused me to kind of overcome some addictions,
Mhm.
and used dream work to do that, and to essentially to create a discipline for myself. In fact, these were kind of what I used. I was
What are you pointing to?
sorry,
Just for the
these
listener?
geometric, colorful geometries in a 81
I don't think
array.
we're actually even getting those on screen. Are you
Oh, really?
able to show us?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. Oh, these are so beautiful. So for the listener, this is like I'll call it a grid
Hmm.
with a lot of prismatic colors, different colors in each square, and then these patterns of triangles and circles and squares in varying concentricities,
Hmm.
shall we say?
Perfect.
Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, that's a great description. And I was studying alchemy and Jungian dream work at the time, and but I was finding hangups on kind of the cultural language or the personifications that are kind of common. I needed something more abstract personally, so I was gravitated. I've always been drawn to geometry since before I could speak, and so that's kind of my home language. And I was able to work more with the abstractions that way, and to kind of embed or encode my dreams into those images in a way
Whoa.
that I could meditate with them. And
Yes.
so since then, my art and music have largely come out of that practice, and that's another way I see it, as this kind of like super sensual root that I like to work from.
Can you I mean, I don't want you to, like, give away all of your secrets, but do you feel comfortable maybe explaining what that means in practice? Like,
Hmm.
is it literally let me back up and just say, this is making me think of, the technique, that's called incubatio or
Hmm.
dream incubation. I know in ancient Greece, they would sometimes call this, uh, temple sleep. It's this idea that you can maybe, like, in like, go to sleep with the intention of having some kind of a transformational or healing dream. Is
Hmm.
that kind of the realm that you're working in, where you'll go to sleep with an intention in mind? Or I don't know, how does this work for you in as far as you
Yeah,
care to share?
yeah. I have done stuff like that before, but this particular practice is really after this kind of life changing dream. I was began looking back on dreams that I documented throughout my life and really collected essentially nine kind of core dreams, which to me were not. I'm not interested in like interpreting the dream so much as getting back into the dream, and these were the most enigmatic dreams I've had, so the most open to interpretation.
Can I
Yeah.
just jump in for clarity's sake? These are dreams that you have had over the course of your life. So
Yep.
you in the waking world were saying, "What are the dreams that have left the biggest impression on me?"
Hmm.
And then you kinda cataloged those or archived those for
Yeah.
yourself? Okay, keep going.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And so each of these shapes offers a different combination of three dreams, viewed from different angles, right? Different combinations. And so that's a way for me to kind of reinvest myself in that dream or those dreams, but also to kind of see them through one another and to gain different insights. I mean, they all represent kind of different aspects to me: elemental, textural, sonic. Um, I've kind of developed a vocabulary of associations, I guess, with
Yeah,
each one.
correspondences.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So and again, I'm trying not to be too nosy, but I'm
Hmm.
quite nosy. So that beautiful image that you shared with us, to understand that each of those symbols represents one of the dreams or an aspect of the dream, is that right? Like, are all
Hmm.
9 dreams represented in that painting?
In the whole thing, yes. Each individual square contains three dreams in
Ah,
different arrangements, and so I one way I access that is numerologically. I'll just kind of sum up the date, and that determines where on the board I give my attention to, and I like the kind of randomness or synchronicity of that as well. Um, but yeah, it's been. I felt crazy at times as I was pursuing putting this together because it was coming to me in dreams, and I've kind of given myself to that in a lot of ways. Um, but whenever I was kind of overcome with doubt, I would work with it again and just find deep inspiration. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is why I do this.
yeah, yeah. Are you open to adding to the 9 dreams? Like, can new dreams be part of this?
Yeah. So the way I've approached the nine dreams is to kind of look at them as fundamental qualities or essences in life and
Mm,
in the life that I know. And so any dreams I have can be kind of channeled into one of those streams, so to speak. But
okay.
that's a way I've really enjoyed working with it. And certain symbolisms kind of crop back up. Often animals and insects are kind of guiding figures or integrating
Mhm,
figures,
mhm.
colors, and so forth.
How interesting. I love how this is still, like, not actually explaining anything. Like, I'm st like, you're managing to still have these layers of
Lots of
secrets,
details.
which well, no, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. You did reference one life-changing dream in particular. Is that
Hmm.
a dream that you'd rather keep private?
As curious as you are. I'm as confessional, so I'm not a very private person.
Oh, good.
Um,
Can you tell us all about the dream? The life-changing dream.
well, this happened at a time during the pandemic when kind of alcoholism had swallowed a lot of my willpower,
Mhm.
and I was refusing Alcoholics Anonymous because I was concerned that I would have bad experiences there, and so I was pushing that away. But this dream came actually 3 nights in a row. It came the same. I've never had that happen before. And the third time I woke up, heart pounding, covered in sweat, wide awake, remembered every detail, walked outside, and then had an old man. This was when I was awake. An old man walked down the middle of the road and asked me to pray with him in the middle of the road, and I did that. And it was, and this was right as the sun was rising. And then after we prayed, he walked on across the train tracks and disappeared. And it was like out of a movie.
So that literally happened, or was that a waking vision of the old man?
That literally happened after I woke up. Yeah, and
Whoa.
so it felt like this, if nothing else, a confirmation to pay attention to what has happened.
Incredible.
And I took that as a strong sign to get myself together based on also aspects of the dream. And I made a vow at that time to dedicate myself to this work, to the secret sound work, which kind of evolved into the American Museum of Paramusicology. And it's been challenging because I've been working lots of kind of low wage jobs and just trying to get by, but I've made that vow to dedicate myself to the work, and I've continued to do that.
Matt, I'm so moved. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. I
Yeah,
really have chills. This feels like such a powerful act of devotion, and I mean, if I can just be one more voice, I'm sure other people have told you this, but what you're doing is so special and it's so meaningful to me. Like,
thank
and I
you.
know many more people feel the same way about what you're doing and will continue to. And you're also doing such an act of stewardship because so many of these artists who you're shining your light upon, many of them did go unappreciated, I think, in their own time.
Hmm.
And I also think there's something very magical about working with these, as you call them, ancestors and keeping their music and their magic alive. So I don't know. Just I'm really, really dazzled by that. Thank you for sharing that with me. How gorgeous.
Yeah, thank you.
And so where do you see your project, I don't know, taking you? Do you see yourself writing more music and creating more visual art? Do you also want to keep doing episodes? Like what do you see in terms of intentions or next steps for this project?
Well, the art has become largely kind of this non-professional sphere, which is it's just my kind of church in a lot of ways. I'm
Mm,
surrounded by it in here, um, but and I don't put much pressure on that practice at all to be anything or to evolve or to improve. It's just a space of freedom and play
mhm.
and inspiration. Um, the American Museum of Paramusicology, I do have a couple of books in the works. One is almost done, called Unknowable Music, and that's before Secret Sound. I basically wrote these 20 to 40 page essays that were way too long and dense for anyone to really read or publish. And so the Secret Sound podcast was my version of concision and accessibility, trying to hone my language a little bit better.
Yeah.
And so this book kind of goes back into some of those essays, which have been kind of tweaked and massaged a little bit. Just again, looking at kind of Buddhist Bubblegum looked at Arthur Russell's use of Buddhism in his creative process. This book will kind of be 5 composers who have drawn from different traditions in their process. And then I'm just kind of gradually opening the fan. Um,
Ah.
and I hope to do a more kind of historical overview of things in a subsequent book. But yeah,
How fabulous. Well, I cannot wait. And I desperately want to read your Arthur Russell book. I haven't gotten a chance to yet. It's been on my wish list forever, and I love his music.
so amazing.
And I guess I should ask, like, what made you start with Arthur Russell? Like, why was he such a guiding spirit for you?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, like I was really drawn to artists beyond any kind of stylistic concerns, and so that
Mhm.
when you encounter Arthur Russell, you pretty quickly learn that he's this chameleon of music. Whether
And I'll
it's
just I'll just jump
Mhm.
in and say some people might be familiar with him as a cellist and a singer or singer-songwriter, but then he does some electronic stuff, like, he really is, transcendent of genre, as you
Oh yeah,
say.
all over the map. Um, and so for me, I was like just taking deep inspiration in his music and in that kind of iridescent quality that he has.
Ah, that's
And
one of my favorite words, iridescent, gorgeous. Yes, yes,
I use
yes.
it a lot. I love that word too.
The best.
And that's, yeah, how I describe a lot of these people I love. Um, and but I was like, what's there's something connecting all these things, you know? And I would see references to his Buddhism, but it was very superficial, or it just left me asking tons of questions. And then that led me. I was in New York. I was doing my grad work, and that led me to the archive, which was then in Audio Records' office. And Steve Knudsen, graciously allowed me to kind of sit in there and go through things. Um, and it was just like this. I was like a kid in a candy store. Everything I thought was going to be there was there and more. And I just realized that he was, kind of like George Harrison once said, he's trying to spiritually infiltrate pop music, and that was
Ooh.
what Arthur was trying to do.
Oh, I love
Um,
that.
yeah, and he did it so beautifully. The the way he applied numerology, the way he applied astrology, the way he applied meditation and mantra
Mm.
was just so inspiring. And that's like with Arthur and a lot of the people I'm drawn to, or I'm drawn to people who have a creative engagement with these traditions,
Yes.
and that comes through, especially when we working with in the field of art or music. And Arthur's an incredible example of someone who creatively applied Buddhist teachings to his own nature.
Yes. Oh, so beautifully said. And he was gone far too soon. I think
Mm.
he passed away when he was it 40 or in his 40s, right?
Yeah, 42, I believe.
Oh, my goodness. But boy, did he leave us with such a gorgeous legacy. I understand that your father was an Episcopal priest.
Hmm.
And this is, like, just a bananas synchronicity. So my husband's name is Matt, and
Hmm.
his dad is an Episcopal priest.
Oh, nice.
So I probably know a little bit more about, or at least about the lingo than one might assume. I was raised Jewish,
Hmm.
and so that world was very new to me when, Matt and I first started dating. We've been together 20 years.
Yeah.
But, having a father as a priest is a very specific experience, and I just wondered how that may have influenced your own, I'll just say broadly, your own spirituality, your own understanding of the metaphysical world.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. My dad was a huge influence on me, um, but not necessarily through Episcopalianism, but more through just who he was, because he never talked about the Bible or sin or heaven or any of those things. He talked about social justice. He talked about ecology. He talked about rights for women and immigrants and LGBTQ persons.
Mhm.
And so those priorities. And aside from that, he was uh, into joy and pleasure and all of
Ah!
these things that were, as a teenager, I like to say I walked away from the church instead of run,
Mhm.
because I couldn't argue with any of the things he was putting forward. It was more the church culture that pushed me away.
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, his last words were, "There is joy in everything." I was like, "Geez."
Damn.
Yeah.
Wow. Going out on a high. That's pretty amazing.
But he was critical of meditation, which he thought was selfish, and
Whoa.
he he got my mother into Jungian work, but then kind of pulled away from it as well.
Mhm.
Um, and I one thing I've realized is that he was just this poster boy extrovert. He craved community at every instance and distrusted anyone who really engaged their interior too much. Um, but as an introvert, I know there are benefits to both perspectives and so forth. So that was helpful, and also seeing kind of the under the hood of the church
Yep.
was informative as well.
Yeah. And did your mom have any kind of influence on your spirituality?
Absolutely, yeah. She was the one. She was teaching dream workshops in the church in the 80s or 70s,
Whoa.
and she was the one that first encouraged me to pay attention to my dreams and keep a dream journal and all of that. So
Wow.
I definitely trace all the Jungian stuff comes back to her. Um, yeah, both parents. I was very, very fortunate.
What a blessing. Is she still alive?
Hmm.
Okay. And are you able to share your projects with her? Does she have any kind of foothold into your work?
She's not so eager to kind of get into the weeds with it,
Mhm.
but she's extremely supportive and kind of always kind of sharing her reflections on things. And yeah, I'm very fortunate that she can be supportive of it.
I love it. All right, Mama Marble.
Yeah, right.
Um, this is, kind of like a smushy question, but I'm just curious, like, do you have any language that you feel comfortable using in regard to your own spiritual identity? Like, I call myself a witch, and it's for many reasons, and there's a lot of consideration behind that word.
Hmm.
Do you have any words like that that feel right in terms of your own spiritual identity?
I haven't boiled it down to one, but the thing I keep coming back to is, as far as like what my calling is to really nurture the mystery, um, and not to solve it, but to nurture it. I just think it's extremely important that we nurture and create a space in our own consciousness that has no categories, that has no comparative force at all, that is unbounded. And so that's my drive. That's what connects me with that. That's what I get from dreams. I would, Rahsaan Roland Kirk is one of my big inspirations. Incredible musician, composer, and people would ask him what his religion was, and he would say, "Mine is the religion of dreams." And I would say that's probably the closest thing to my perspective.
Oh my goodness, how exquisite. Well, listen, Matt, I know you're somebody that I could talk to for many, 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 many hours, and I genuinely hope this is the first of many more to come. I just have such respect and true adoration for what you make and what you do. So
Thank
I'm
you.
just so thrilled to get to finally connect with you. In our final moments together, is there anything you want to make sure that people know about that you have coming up? Can you tell us once again how people can be subscribers to the museum and so on? Anything
Yeah.
you want to plug? Plug
Okay.
away.
Thank you. Um, yeah, the main thing is the AMP journal and the subscription. That is something I devote a lot of time to, um, with the interviews and the historical writing. I also try to have audio documentaries if I can, and share archives, and just lots of goodies in that direction.
And of
Um,
course, the podcasts. And we didn't even talk about your other podcast, the Hidden Present.
the Hidden Present, yeah, that was
Yes.
a short-lived interview series that I'm still very proud of. Really beautiful people from different backgrounds talking about the role of intuition, imagination, and metaphysics in their work.
Mm.
Um, yeah, beautiful, beautiful talks with people.
What is the best way for people to subscribe? It's just going to the website, is that right? What was that URL?
Yeah, the URL is www.mattmarble.net/AMP.
Okay. And once again, if you want to hear all of the episodes of the Secret Sound podcast, that's where to do it. As you mentioned earlier, there are lots of freebies where people can get hooked as I did and as I'm sure many others did and will. Um, Matt, thank you so much for doing this and I really can't wait to continue the conversation.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's so nice to connect with you.